Hello, everyone. This is Sean from the Soccer Nostalgia blog. I have the pleasure to interview Mr. Davide Eskelund Rota. Mr. Rota is an Italian former freelance journalist from Biella in Italy, now living in Odense in Denmark since 2013, working as a languages teacher. Mr. Rota has appeared before on the podcast discussing the matches of the Denmark national team and has also participated in written interviews about the matches of the Italian national team under Vittorio Pozzo. Being an Italian and an expert on the Danish national team, we take the opportunity to look at the match history between the nations. This is an interview that's separate from a podcast series. This video interview will serve as a companion piece to a written blog presentation on the head to head encounters between Denmark and Italy. Hello, Davide. Always a pleasure.
Hello, me too.
The first matches between the nations was a friendly on December 5th, 1964, at Bologna, with Italy featuring the likes of Giovanni Trapattoni and Gianni Rivera 1-3-1. This was Italy's first win over Denmark and the first match on Italian soil. What do you think it took until the 1960s for the sides to meet one another?
Oh, it was the first match official about FIFA, but we have to say as a preview, Italy and Denmark they met already in the Olympic Games in the '48 in London. But for the Italian Federation, that's an official game because Italy means it was the best team at that time, but not for the FIFA because it was an Olympic game. Denmark won 5-3, and the 7 players of that Denmark national team later moved in Italy, in Italian teams like, for example, John Hansen, that scored 4 goals in that game. But anyway, the first real official games, as you said, is Italy Denmark 3-1 in Bologna. It's not usual Italian national team plays in Bologna, but in the 60s, Bologna had a very good team. Was Italian master for the last time, the seventh and the last time in the 1964. So it was natural because many of Bologna players were playing in the national team for Italy. That was a friendly game. So Italy was on the way to prepare the World Cup in England in the '66, and Denmark has just finished a very good campaign in the European Championship in '64, where they were in the top four, and it was at that moment a very big result for a national team like Denmark that was completely built about amateur players. Very, very surprisingly, in that game, Denmark scored first with forward Henning Enoksen from Vejle and Aarhus. Enoksen had a full career in Denmark, but he had a lot of proposal from Italy, from Genoa, from Bologna, and other clubs in that period. But he always preferred to stay in Denmark as an amateur player. But in the second half, Italy was better. Most experienced the players, like not just the famous Giovanni Trapattoni from Milan. He was a defensive midfield, but also other players like, for example, the midfield Giacomo Bulgarelli, Bologna's captain, or the left back Giacinto Facchetti. Facchetti was just been European champions with Inter Milan, and he was the captain of Inter Milan, and it was him. He left the trophy in the '64. Another very outstanding player in that game was, of course, Gianni Rivera, the best player in Europe about France football campaign. But Italy, as I said, was better in the second half, won 3-1 with the goals of Pascutti, Bulgarelli, and Pascutti again. So 2 players from Bologna. The Italian coach was Edmondo Fabbri. He was not famous internationally because he was from a small team from Mantova. He coached Mantova from Serie D, so the fourth level, to the Serie A. to the maximum level. And then he was the coach of the national team. His philosophy was very brilliant. Italy played in that period a very good offensive style, but unfortunately in the World Cup in the 66, Italy was beaten surprisingly by the North Korean team, and Italy left the competition with a very, very surprisingly result, and they were not welcome back in Italy by the fans because they were casting tomatoes and eggs and other things, because the fans, they meant it was a big shame to lose against North Korea. But in that game, Italy was better, deserved the friendly game 3-1.
The sides did not face one another for more than a decade. Denmark hosted Italy for the first time in a friendly at Copenhagen on September 22nd, 1976. Italy won 1-0, but with a goal by Paolino Polici. This was Italy's first win on away soil. On the Italian side, Dino Zoff was involved, captain and goalkeeper, and who would also later manage Italy against Denmark in 1999. I assume this is another match that is not very well remembered.
No, actually it's not, because it was in the middle of the week, not well covered about televisions, and both teams were in a experimental phase. Denmark was finishing a period about amateurism, and Sepp Piontek was ready to be the new national team coach, but at that moment was still the last coach of the amateurism period, Nielsen. So Denmark was not a team builded too much about professionalism. Most of the players, they were playing abroad, but it was not still a compact and a well-trained team. They met just one day before the game. The players, they still were drinking beer in the rooms, and so it was not a very good period for Danish football. Italy won 1-0 with a goal about Paolo Pulici, because in that period many players of Juventus, they were not available. For example, the famous Roberto Bettega. So Pulici was instead of Bettega and scored the goal. Is necessary to see the goal in a very, very old video about the Danish television. I am lucky to have this, but I have asked it to the Danish television because it's not online. It's not easy to find it. In Italy, Marco Tardelli was playing right back, but later we know he was a very, very good midfielder and was one of the best players in the winning in the World Cup in '82. Other players were both from Torino and other clubs, but not many from Juventus, like in the '78 and in '82, where Italy was playing two very, very good World Cup campaign. So the goal was a very good combination, a very good action, but Italy plays defensive, and in defense it was a counter-attack. Denmark was a bit better, but was unlucky. Anyway, 1-0 to Italy. Pulici scored.
It was during the decade of the 1980s that the sides met with more frequency. On its way to win the World Cup in 1982, Italy faced Denmark in the qualifiers. At this point, Denmark was now managed by Sepp Piontek. For the first match on November 1st, 1980 at Rome, Italy won 2-0 with Graziani scoring twice. This was the first official qualifier between the nations. In the return fixture on June 3rd, 1981 at Copenhagen, Denmark won 3-1. This was Denmark's first ever win in the series against Italy and Italy's first loss. And it would remain as Denmark's only win on home soil against Italy. This was Italy's only loss in the 1982 World Cup adventure. And for Denmark, this 1981 win was a reference match that underlined the progress under Sepp Piontek. And this was the third time Enzo Bearzot managed against Denmark after 1976, 80, and 81. So this 1981 match from those first two matches surely stands out as one of the most important matches in Danish football history.
Yes, indeed, it's an historical match for the Danish football history. Italy was already qualified in Spain in the finals because won the first 4 matches in the group with 8 points. So Italy had a slow. The last 4 matches was not so very good because Italy was already qualified. They were not motivated. There were not so many motivations. But at the same time, Denmark was hoping to join the second place after Italy because the 2 first teams in the group were qualified in Spain, and Denmark was fighting against Yugoslavia and Greece for the second place. And for a moment, it was possible. Denmark with Piontek, the first real Danish professional national team, was ready to join a final competition. But the game against Italy was amazing because there was Park and Idrettspark, and at the time was the name of the Copenhagen stadium, was sold out, and Denmark won 3-1 with a fantastic, amazing game. 3-1, very well deserved. Italy was completely down in the written, in the agonism, and was down also in the technical. So it was very, very well deserved from Denmark that win. But anyway, unfortunately, it was not enough to qualify the Piontek's team to the finals because Yugoslavia was number 2 in the group. Denmark scored in the second half with the defender Per Rundtved, already unfortunately died a few months ago. Rundtved scored from the back side, from the right side, and the Italian defense was not very well placed in that action. 2 minutes later, from a free kick, Frankie Arnesen scored a goal, and the Italian wall was open. Dino Zoff was very, very upset about this goal. And Italy scored once with Graziani, but in the last minutes, Lars Bastrup, a forward from Hamburg in Germany, scored the 3-1. And the people in the stadium in Copenhagen was crazy. It was amazing. It was a very, very important win because for the first time, Denmark showed their potential with a lot of good players playing in the best European leagues, like, for example, Søren Lerby, Frankie Arnesen in Ajax in Holland, and of course the famous Alan Simonsen from Borussia Mönchengladbach and later Barcelona. In that game, there was also Reben Elkier. He was still playing in Germany, in Köln, but later he was Italian champions with Hellas Verona. The problem of Denmark national team was the goalkeeper. Until Denmark had the very famous, the great Peter Schmeichel, Denmark has not a very good goalkeeper. In that game, in the goal was Ole Kvist. He was the only amateur player in the team. He was still working as a policeman with his motorcycle in Copenhagen. He was the goalkeeper of Kobe KB, the oldest club in Europe after the British team formed in 1876. So the problem was the goalkeeper, not in that game, but later Denmark suffered to don't have a very real professional and top player in goal. So 3-1 for Denmark, but not enough for qualified to the Spain finals in the 82.
The sides would meet again at the tail end of the decade. On June 17th, 1988, the sides met during the UEFA European Championships at Köln in West Germany. This was the first match between the teams in the finals of a major tournament and the first match on a neutral soil. Italy won 2-0 with Azeglio Vicini managing as Denmark for the first time. Denmark's Morten Olsen had played in 1980, 1981, and this 1988 match. And he would also manage Denmark against Italy in 2004, 2012, and 2013. For the last match between the nations during this decade, Italy hosted Denmark in a friendly on February 22nd, 1989 at Pisa, with Italy winning 1-0. So in total, Sepp Piontek managed Denmark against Italy on 4 occasions. And these 2 matches at the end of the decade more or less reflect the decline of the Piontek era, I assume.
Yes, it was the sunset of the famous Danish Dynamite period, where Sepp Piontek, the German, was the chef in command and the man in command, and he was very good to change the Danish mentality. He was a real fighter, but he was a real coach, very good to prepare the games and to give to the players a professional mentality. In the last years, in the decades, Denmark was not so brilliant like in 82, 83, also 84, when they were in the European Championship in France. So it was normal. Italy had the best period of the Italian football in that period, where Italian clubs were winning a lot of European competitions. So Italy was changing after Berzot period for a new, very good team ready to fight in the home World Cup in Italy in 90. So it was very easy to Italy to show they were better in the European game in 88, where they won 2-0 with the goals of the famous Alessandro Altobelli from Inter and left back Gigi D'Agostini from Juventus. So Denmark was in the European competition in 88 with Piontek, but it was the last song about the Danish Dynamite. Later, they were not qualified in the Italian World Cup in 90. But Italy was growing, was better, won also the game in Pisa in 89. So Italy was with a completely new team, only a couple of players, Bergomi and Altobelli from 82, and a lot of good talents like the couple of attackers from Sampdoria, Gianluca Vialli and Roberto Mancini. They later met as a coach and assistant coach in the Italian national team. So it was normal to see Italy won 2 games in a row against Denmark, one in Köln in Germany in the European 88 and one friendly in Pisa in 89. We had to wait to see Denmark again compete, fight with the best European national teams in the start of the 90s.
In the 90s, the sides faced one another on 3 occasions in mostly competitive matches. So on June 12, 1991, at Malmo in Sweden, during the Scania 100 tournament, Italy defeated Denmark 2-0. This was the second match after the 1980 Euros match to be at a neutral venue, with Italy winning once again. It was also the only time a match between the nations went into extra time. Azeglio Vicini managed Italy for the 3rd time against Denmark after 88, 89, and 91. Now we come to the end of the decade. Italy and Denmark are in the Euros in a qualifying group. On March 27 at Copenhagen, Italy defeated Denmark 2-1. This was Italy's second away win over Denmark, the first one since 1976. Italy were now managed by Dino Zoff. In this 1999 match, Paolo Maldini played against Denmark for the 4th time. We have the matches in 88, 89, 91, and now 99. The return fixture on Italian soil on September 8, 1999 at Napoli, Denmark won 3-2. This was Denmark's first and only away win, and to date, its last victory over Italy. Peter Schmeichel played for the 5th time against Italy in this match. What is remembered from the 90s matches, the decade of the 90s?
Yes, not much to say about the game in the match in the 91. It was a tournament. It was a friendly tournament, and Italy won after 120 minutes because the score was 0-0 in the first part of the game. So Italy need extra time to win against Denmark. Denmark was very tired, and was easy to Italy score the 2 goals in counterattacks. With Rizzitelli was one of the best players in the game. He was a specialist about counterattacks, and Gianluca Vialli. But the real best man of the match was Giuseppe Giannini from Roma. He was a very good playmaker, and he was inspired in the extra time. He made 2 assists for Rizzitelli and Vialli. The 2 games on 99 are very interesting because in that qualifications group, both Italy and Denmark were qualified to the final round in 2000. In the first game, Denmark lost 1-2 against Italy, and the first goal was a terrible mistake about Jesper Grønkjær. He was making a back pass, and Inzaghi, because he was a very good, a real fox in the area, Inzaghi understood this back pass, and he stealed the ball and he scored the first goal for Italy. The second Italian goal was scored about Antonio Conte, now a famous coach. Antonio Conte was scoring with the head with a short cross from Francesco Totti. Francesco Totti at that time was very young, but he was a shooting star, and he made a fantastic dribbling in the left side of the Danish area and making also a tunnel to the legs of Thomas Helveg. Thomas Helveg was also known in Italy because he played many years for Inter, Milan, and Udinese. So Italy was very clever to win 2-1 in Copenhagen. Not very well deserved, but Inzaghi, Conte, they were very, very clever players. But on the contrary, when they played the return games in Napoli, Italy was 2-0 in the first part of the game. They were thinking it was okay also for another win. Peter Schmeichel that day was not at his best. He was a bit insecure, not so good in the 2 Italian goals. But Italy was a bit with the full bell, and Denmark won 3-2 in Napoli. So it was a very important win, because the Danish national team at that time, the coach was the Swedish coach Bo Johansson, won and take the second tickets in the group for the qualification of the European Cup in the 2000. So Italy very clever, good in the first game in Copenhagen, but Italy a bit lazy in the game in Napoli, and Denmark was not maybe at his best like in the 80s, but was experienced enough to win the game.
So during the decade of the 2000s, Italy and Denmark just met once, and this was during the 2004 Euros at Portugal. So they met on June 14th, 2004 at Guimarães, and they played to a scoreless tie. After 1988, this was the second finals that the sides had met, and the third time on neutral soil. And it was also the first tied match in the series between the nations. This match was overshadowed by Francesco Totti's spitting incident on Christian Paulsen at the end of the match. So at this point, Italy were managed by Giovanni Trapattoni, who played in the first match in 1964. And we mentioned that Morten Olsen, a previous player in matches in the 80s, was managing against Italy for the first time. This match reflected Italy's disappointing Euros.
Yes, it was a match, the first match of the C group in Guimarães in Portugal. Both coaches had a defensive philosophy, Morten Olsen and Giovanni Trapattoni, 2 suspicious teams. So not much to tell about the game, but of course, as you said, there was the episode about Francesco Totti spitting in Christian Paulsen, provocation and bad reaction. The episode was not seen by the referee Mejuto Gonzalez from Spain, but there were Italian and Danish television. They showed Totti spitting, and Totti can't play the next game for Italy. But the game itself was not so good, not very top players in the Danish national team, and Italy with very good players, but with defensive coaches. Italy was not qualified. Denmark was, because they made a famous or infamous about Italian side 2-2 against Sweden in the third game, and it was enough to both Scandinavian team to take a place to go forward. and Italian journalists, they were a bit scandalized about this 2-2. It was like a fixing match, but of course, Italy has nothing to say about fixing. Italy has a bad history about that. So it was necessary to both teams, so they just made their own interests. Anyway, not a very good game. That was not fun to see Totti spitting, because Totti was a very good player with fantastic technical skills, but sometimes he had a bad temperament and he has a bad behavior in the game, not only this time, but also too much red cards in his career.
The sides faced off twice in the decade of 2010s in World Cup qualifiers on 2012 and 2013. So on October 16, 2012 at Milan, Italy defeated Denmark 3-1. The following year, on October 11, 2013 at Copenhagen, the match ended in a 2-2 tie. And this was the second tied match between the nations in the series. Gianluigi Buffon, who had represented Italy in the 1999 matches, more than a decade later, this would be his fourth matches against Denmark, this match in 2013. Morten Olsen managed Denmark for the third time against Italy, and he also played 3 times against them. What is mostly remembered from these 2 matches?
I remember much because I was in the stadium in both games. And those 2 games means much to my life, because one was the last game I saw when I was living in Italy, then in Milano. And the next one was the first game I saw when I was already living in Denmark. And I was in Copenhagen in the park. And first game, Milano, Giuseppe Meazza Stadium in October 2012. Italy won 3-1. Italy plays the second half completely, the second half 10 men, because the Italo-Argentinian attacking player, Osvaldo, had a red card from the Slovenian referee, Skomina. But at that time, at that point, Italy was already 2-1, because Montolivo and De Rossi scored in the first half, and then Denmark scored with William Kvist in the last minute in the first half. But Italy was most experienced, was most clever to keep the result, and scored 1 goal more with 10 men in the second half with the Thor talent Mario Balotelli. Mario Balotelli is remembered in the Italian football like one of the most promising players when he was young, but one of the most up and down players in the Italian history, with a lot of occasion, with a lot of chance. He was very good in the field, but he had a bad temperament, a bad behavior, and he had not a good relationship with the coaches he had. Only one, maybe Roberto Mancini. He was patient enough to support Balotelli's crazy personality. But in that game, Balotelli scored a very important goal, and Italy won 3-1. And like in 80s, was next already qualified for the World Cup in Brazil in the 2014, where Italy was not so very good. Anyway, Denmark tried to take the second place again in the game in the Parken, in the Copenhagen stadium in October 2013, but it was not enough. Italy had Claudio Prandelli as a coach. Italy was scoring first in the first half with Osvaldo. The same player was sent off in the first game in Milano. But Denmark at that time has his own Balotelli, and it was Niklas Bentner. Niklas Bentner was a fantastic attacking player, fantastic forward, physical, technical, but like Balotelli, with lack of personality. So he had a lot of situation out from the pitch where he was in jail, fined by the police, and a bad interview with the press. So Bentner at that time was playing in Arsenal in London, scored twice for Denmark, but in the very last minute of the game, Italy scored the 2-2 goal with Alberto Aquilani. That time he was playing in Roma, and Aquilani was just coming in the game instead of Marchisio from Juventus. So a 2-2 was not enough for Denmark to qualify for the World Cup in Brazil, and Italy was first in the group. Italy had a very old team in that game. The age was 29 years, so very experienced team, but Prandelli was not good enough to get in some very young, promising, good players in Brazil. So Italy was not very good in that final round in 2014, the next year. So that was the last game I saw in the stadium. And I have to say I miss it because it's almost 10 years, Denmark and Italy, my two hearts, my girlfriend and my wife, they can't they can't meet together in an official but also in a friendly game. So I hope soon the two federations are lucky enough to meet again.
So, in closing, on balance, Italy seems to have had the upper hand in the history of matches between the nations. How do you regard this history?
The score is 13 matches, friendly and official games. 8 time Italy won, 3 Danish win, and 2 draws. So it's about something realistic, I think, because Italy is one of the biggest land in Europe about football, together with Germany, England, Spain, and maybe France. And Denmark was a very, very small nation with not so long tradition and history like Italy. The national sport in Denmark is still handball, and maybe Denmark is not so big like a nation like Italy. Italy has 60 million inhabitants, 60 million people, and Denmark has only 5-6 million people. So that's the difference. So it's okay, the difference. Denmark won only 3 times, but they were significant and very important wins about the Danish football developing in history. Italy, by the other side, was most experienced, but in that statistic, we have to remember once more the game of the 48, because in the 48, Italy was after the Second World War with the Olympic team. Denmark had a better team. 7 players they were transferred in Italy after that game. 5-3. It was a very remembering a very historical games about the Danish national team. So in the start, Denmark was better in the first game, but of course, in 13 games, Italy has showed his power in the European map.
With that, I would like to thank you for this interview and let everyone know to please read the main blog article as well for more detail. The link is included in the video upload description along with our respective contact information. In addition, on the following day, I will upload the compendium with all the lineups and any available photos and videos from these matches. So, Davide, thank you once again and hope to continue these discussions on Denmark football history.
Yes, thank you, Shahan, and goodbye to all the followers of your blog.
Thank you.